The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the mahogany dining table, where my family sat in their Sunday best, their voices a comfortable hum of gossip and laughter. The smell of rosemary lamb and garlic potatoes filled the air of my childhood home in Westchester County. But I might as well have been invisible. 23 years in the Army, 3 tours in Afghanistan, a Bronze Star and a promotion to full colonel. Yet here I sat at the kids' table of conversation, dismissed as easily as the help. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Sarah's boutique is doing phenomenally well, my sister Victoria announced, cutting into her lamb with surgical precision. She just opened a second location in Greenwich. The waiting list for appointments is 3 months out. Victoria's manicured fingers gestured elegantly as she spoke, her wedding ring catching the light. She had perfected the art of making success sound effortless. My brother Marcus nodded approvingly from across the table, adjusting his expensive tie. That's a real achievement. Building something tangible, something that matters to the community. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world, not like some people who just follow orders and march around in the desert. The casual cruelty of his words hit me like shrapnel, but I kept my expression neutral. 23 years of military discipline had taught me to control my reactions, to never let them see weakness. I took another bite of lamb, chewing slowly while my mother beamed at my siblings as if they'd just announced they'd cured cancer. "Oh, and Marcus," Mother continued, her voice bright with pride, "tell everyone about the Johnson contract." She dabbed at her lips with her monogrammed napkin, the one that read Eleanor Mitchell in elegant script. Eleanor Mitchell, widow of Judge Harold Mitchell, pillar of Westchester Society, and my mother who hadn't called me by my rank once in the 4 years since my promotion. Marcus straightened in his chair, practically preening. We landed the Johnson pharmaceutical account. $47 million in marketing spend over 3 years. The biggest contract Fitzgerald and Associates has ever secured. He paused for effect, clearly savoring the moment. The partners are already talking about fast-tracking me to a senior partner. That's wonderful, darling, Mother gushed, reaching over to squeeze his hand. Your father would be so proud. A real businessman, just like he always wanted. I set down my fork, the metallic clink against the china louder than intended. Congratulations, Marcus, that's quite an accomplishment. My voice was steady, professional, the same tone I used when briefing generals at the Pentagon. Victoria turned to me with that patronizing smile I'd grown to hate. And what about you, Alex? Still playing soldier? She said it the way someone might ask about a hobby, like stamp collecting or bird watching. When are you going to settle down and do something serious with your life? The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Something serious. I thought about the convoy I'd led through Kandahar province, the IED that had taken out the vehicle behind mine, the 22 soldiers I'd brought home alive that day. I thought about the counterintelligence operation I'd run last year, the one that had prevented a major security breach and earned me a commendation from the Secretary of Defense. I thought about the hours I'd spent coordinating with NATO allies, the strategic planning sessions that helped shape foreign policy, the responsibility of commanding 800 personnel at Fort Braxton. I enjoy my work, I said simply, reaching for my water glass. The crystal felt cold against my fingertips, a sharp contrast to the heat building in my chest. But is it really a career for a woman your age? Mother chimed in, her voice heavy with concern that felt performative rather than genuine. You're 39, Alexandra. Most of your friends are married with children, building real lives. Victoria has little Emma and James, and Marcus and Jennifer are trying for their second. She gestured vaguely at my uniform, the same gesture someone might make when discussing an unfortunate stain. This military thing. It's been nice for traveling, I suppose, but don't you think it's time to come home and be normal? Normal. The word echoed in my mind like a ricochet. I wondered what they would consider normal about the emergency appendectomy I'd performed on a 19-year-old private in a field hospital outside Kabul when the surgeon was tied up with casualties. I wondered if they'd find it normal that I spoke 4 languages fluently, that I'd been personally briefed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that foreign diplomats knew my name and sought my counsel on Middle Eastern affairs. This is my home now, I said, gesturing to the base insignia on my uniform. The army is my family. Victoria laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. Oh, Alex, that's so dramatic. The army isn't a family. It's a job. And not a very feminine one at that. She turned to Marcus conspiratorially. Remember when we were kids and she used to play with those little green army men? We thought she'd grow out of it. Some people never do, Marcus replied with a smirk. Some people prefer taking orders to making their own decisions. The insult was wrapped in silk, delivered with the casual cruelty that only family could perfect. They saw my rank as dress-up, my service as an extended phase of adolescent rebellion. To them, I wasn't Colonel Alexandra Thompson, commanding officer of the 347th Military Intelligence Battalion. I was just Alex, the weird daughter who'd never learned to fit in. Mother stood to clear the plates, her movements graceful and practiced. Well, I just hope you'll think about settling down soon, dear. Mrs. Patterson's son David is doing very well for himself in real estate. He's divorced now, but that's quite common these days. I could arrange an introduction. I'm not interested in meeting Mrs. Patterson's son, I said firmly. Why not? Victoria's voice took on that edge of exasperation reserved for difficult children. You can't be alone forever, Alex. What happens when you're too old for all this military nonsense? What happens when they force you to retire? You'll have nothing. Nothing. The word hit me like a physical blow. I thought about my Distinguished Service Medal, awarded for exceptional meritorious service in a duty of great responsibility. I thought about the scholarship fund I'd established for underprivileged kids in military families, the mentorship program I'd created for young female officers, the strategic doctrine I'd helped develop that was now taught at West Point. But to them, I had nothing. Maybe you're right, I said quietly, pushing back from the table. Maybe I should think about my future more seriously. Mother's face brightened with relief, as if I'd just agreed to check myself into a rehabilitation facility. Oh, wonderful, dear. We can start looking at apartments in the city. There are some lovely condos in your father's old neighborhood. Very respectable area. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need to make a phone call. Thank you for dinner. The politeness was automatic, drilled into me by years of military protocol and childhood etiquette lessons. As I walked toward the French doors leading to the garden, I heard Victoria's voice drift behind me. She'll come around eventually. She's just scared of admitting she wasted half her life playing dress-up. The October air was crisp against my face as I stepped onto the stone terrace. The garden was perfectly manicured, every hedge trimmed to geometric precision, every flower bed mapped out like a military formation. It was beautiful and sterile, like everything else in this house. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen, not really seeing it. The weight of their dismissal settled over me like a heavy coat. These were the people who were supposed to know me best, supposed to love me unconditionally. Instead, they saw my greatest achievements as failures, my proudest moments as embarrassments. The French doors opened behind me, and I heard Marcus's footsteps on the stone. Alex, he said, his voice gentler now that we were alone. Look, I know we can be hard on you sometimes, but it comes from a place of love. We worry about you. I turned to face him, this brother who'd been my closest friend until high school. When social hierarchies and expectations had driven a wedge between us that had only widened with time. Worry about what, exactly? About you wasting your potential, he said earnestly. You're smart, Alex. Really smart. You could have been anything. A lawyer like Dad, a doctor, a successful businesswoman. Instead, you're playing soldier while your life passes by. Playing soldier, as if the uniform I wore was a costume, as if the decisions I made didn't affect real people's lives, as if the responsibility I carried was make-believe. I am successful, Marcus, I said quietly. By any reasonable measure, I'm successful. He shook his head sadly. Success isn't about medals and rank, Alex. It's about building something that lasts. It's about family, about contributing to society in a meaningful way. What do you do? He gestured vaguely, as if searching for words. It's noble, I suppose, but it's not real life. Not real life. 23 years of service to my country. 23 years of sacrifice and dedication and excellence. Dismissed as not real life. I should go, I said, pulling my keys from my pocket. I have an early flight back to base tomorrow. You just got here. Marcus protested. You've been home for what, 6 hours? Can't you stay until Tuesday at least? Home. He still called it home, as if I belonged here among people who saw me as a failure and a disappointment. As if this house with its perfect garden and crystal chandeliers could ever be home to someone they considered nothing. This isn't my home anymore, I said, heading toward the driveway where my rental car waited. It hasn't been for a long time. The drive back to my hotel was a blur of suburban streets and traffic lights. I sat in the silence of the rental car, the echo of their words reverberating in my mind. Playing soldier. Nothing. Not real life. The phrases circled like vultures, picking at the confidence I'd spent decades building. In my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my reflection in the mirror across from me. The woman looking back wore the uniform of a full colonel in the United States Army. She had laugh lines around her eyes from years of shared jokes with fellow officers, worry lines from difficult decisions and heavy responsibilities. She had gray threading through her auburn hair, earned from nights spent planning operations and days spent ensuring her soldiers came home safe. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But tonight, looking at that reflection, all I could see was what my family saw. A 39-year-old woman playing dress-up, refusing to grow up and accept reality. I opened my laptop and pulled up my email, scrolling through the messages that had accumulated during my weekend visit. Updates from my staff, intelligence reports that needed my review, a message from General Morrison about the upcoming NATO conference where I'd be presenting our new counterintelligence protocols. These people trusted me. They valued my opinion, sought my guidance, relied on my expertise. In this world, I mattered. In this world, I was Colonel Thompson, not just Alex, the disappointment who'd never figured out how to be normal. But as I closed the laptop and prepared for bed, my family's words followed me into sleep. And for the first time in years, I wondered if they might be right. Maybe I was just playing soldier. Maybe 23 years of service really did amount to nothing in the real world. I had no idea that in just 3 days, a phone call would change everything. A phone call that would make my family see exactly who Colonel Alexandra Thompson really was, and exactly how wrong they'd been about what constituted nothing. The flight back to Fort Braxton gave me time to think, something I'd learned to both cherish and dread during my years of service. As the commercial airliner climbed through the clouds above New York, I found myself staring out the small window, watching my childhood world shrink to insignificance below. The sprawling suburbs of Westchester County looked like a carefully planned miniature, each house a perfect square with its own tiny green space, orderly and predictable. It hadn't always been this way between my family and me. There was a time when they'd been proud, or at least accepting, of my choices. But that felt like a lifetime ago, buried under years of disappointment and growing distance that I'd never quite understood how to bridge. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to the beginning, to the moment everything changed. I was 17, a senior at Westchester Preparatory Academy, where my father had pulled strings to get me admitted despite our middle-class income. The school was designed for the children of diplomats and corporate executives, places where future senators and Supreme Court justices learned to network before they learned to shave. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Ashworth, had called me into her office on a gray February morning. The walls were lined with college pennants, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and her desk was covered with glossy brochures promising bright futures for the right price. She'd spread out my transcripts like tarot cards, her expression thoughtful but concerned. "Alexandra, your grades are exemplary," she'd said, tapping her Mont Blanc pen against my file. "Top 5% of your class, excellent SAT scores, captain of the debate team. You have your pick of excellent schools." She paused, her eyebrows knitting together. "But I'm concerned about your college essay. I'd written about leadership, about wanting to serve something larger than myself, about the responsibility that came with privilege and education." It was heartfelt and honest, two qualities that apparently made Mrs. Ashworth nervous. "The military academy route is unusual for a young woman of your background," she continued carefully. "Your father was a federal judge. Your mother comes from old Connecticut money. Have you considered more traditional paths? Law school, perhaps? Medicine? Your mother mentioned you've shown interest in international relations. Georgetown has an excellent program, but I'd already made up my mind. The decision had crystallized during a Model UN conference the previous fall, when I'd found myself naturally taking charge during a crisis simulation, coordinating between different delegations, finding solutions where others saw only problems. There was something about the clarity of purpose, the weight of responsibility, that called to me in a way that corporate boardrooms and law libraries never could. I want to serve my country, I told her simply. I want to make a difference. Mrs. Ashworth had sighed, the sound of someone watching a promising student make what she considered a tragic mistake. Well, if you're determined, I suppose West Point is prestigious enough. Your father's connections should help with the nomination process. The nomination had indeed come through, thanks to my father's relationship with Congressman Bradley. But the pride I'd expected from my family never materialized. Instead, there was a subtle shift, a cooling that I didn't recognize at the time but would come to understand all too well. My father had been the first to express his reservations, though he'd couched them in practical terms. "It's a fine institution, Alexandra," he'd said over dinner one evening, cutting his steak with mechanical precision. "Excellent discipline, good networking opportunities. But 4 years is a long commitment, and then there's the service obligation afterward. 8 years total before you can start your real career." Real career. Even then, he had seen military service as a detour rather than a destination. My mother had been more direct in her disapproval. "I just don't understand why you want to put yourself through all that," she'd said while arranging flowers in the front hallway, not looking at me as she spoke. "The physical demands, the harsh environment. You're such a bright girl, Alexandra. You could do anything. Anything except what I wanted to do." Marcus had been 16 then, already showing signs of the charm and ambition that would serve him well in business. He'd been confused more than anything else. "But why the army?" he'd asked. "If you want to help people, why not become a doctor? If you want adventure, why not travel the world as a journalist?" Only Victoria, 14, and still my closest confidant, had seemed to understand. "Alex is going to be like Joan of Arc," she'd announced one day, her eyes bright with adolescent admiration. "She's going to be a warrior." But somewhere between that innocent declaration and the woman who now dismissed my service as playing dress-up, something had changed. The transformation hadn't been sudden or dramatic. It had been gradual, like erosion, each small comment and subtle dismissal wearing away at their respect, until nothing remained but polite tolerance and barely concealed embarrassment. The change had accelerated during my years at West Point. While my classmates' families visited for football games and graduation ceremonies, mine found excuses to stay away. Too busy with work, conflicting social obligations, Marcus's basketball tournament that happened to fall on the same weekend as my commissioning ceremony. I'd graduated second in my class, earned my commission as a second lieutenant in military intelligence, and walked across the stage alone, while other new officers were surrounded by proud families taking pictures. I'd told myself it didn't matter, that I was starting a new chapter, building a new family within the service. But the absence had hurt more than I'd admitted, even to myself. My first assignment had been Fort Gordon in Georgia, where I'd excelled in the advanced individual training for military intelligence. The work had been fascinating, learning to analyze threats, understand foreign military capabilities, coordinate with intelligence agencies. I'd thrown myself into it completely, partly because I loved the intellectual challenge, and partly because it filled the empty spaces where family support should have been. When I'd called home to share my excitement about my first real assignment, my mother's response had been lukewarm at best. "That's nice, dear. Marcus made Dean's List again at Columbia. We're so proud." The pattern had been established early and never varied. My achievements were acknowledged with polite interest, while my siblings' accomplishments were celebrated with genuine enthusiasm. When I'd made captain ahead of schedule, the congratulations had been brief and followed immediately by news of Victoria's engagement to a surgeon from Greenwich. When I'd earned my Bronze Star in Afghanistan, the conversation had quickly shifted to Marcus's promotion at his advertising firm. They'd never asked about the specifics of my deployments, never wanted to know about the work I was doing or the responsibilities I carried. It was as if they'd created a version of my life in their minds. Alexandra playing soldier, having adventures, refusing to grow up, and nothing I did could penetrate that narrative. The worst part was how they'd rewritten history to fit their disappointment. Suddenly, my childhood interest in military history became evidence of an obsession. My natural leadership abilities were reframed as an inability to follow social norms. My independence was transformed into fear of commitment. "You've always been different," my mother had said during one particularly painful phone call after my second deployment. "Even as a child, you were so serious, so intense. We thought you'd outgrow it, learn to be more flexible." Flexible. A code word for compliant. For willing to shape myself according to their expectations rather than following my own path. The gulf had widened with each promotion, each assignment, each year that passed without me returning home to take my place in their version of normal life. By the time I'd made lieutenant colonel, their disappointment had hardened into something approaching contempt. I wasn't just making different choices. I was actively rejecting everything they valued. The irony was that I'd succeeded beyond my wildest teenage dreams. I'd commanded companies and battalions, developed counterintelligence protocols that were now used throughout NATO, briefed generals and politicians on matters of national security. I'd been selected for the Army War College, earned my master's degree in strategic studies, built a reputation as one of the Army's most promising intelligence officers. But none of that mattered to the people who'd raised me. In their eyes, I was still the stubborn teenager who'd chosen the wrong path and refused to admit her mistake. The plane began its descent into Fayetteville, and I could see Fort Braxton spread out below. The neat rows of barracks, the training fields, the administrative buildings where I'd spent the last 3 years building something meaningful. This was my world now. These were my people. And yet the weekend's conversation had shaken something fundamental in my confidence. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just too proud to admit that I'd wasted the best years of my life on something that ultimately didn't matter. Maybe the real world was what Victoria and Marcus had built. Families, businesses, tangible achievements that could be measured in dollars and social status. As I collected my bags and headed for the taxi stand, I tried to shake off the melancholy that had settled over me like fog. I had work to do, soldiers to lead, missions to plan. Personal doubts were a luxury I couldn't afford. But deep down, in a place I rarely allowed myself to examine, the seeds of uncertainty had been planted. And over the next few days, as I went through the motions of command, those seeds would grow into something that threatened everything I'd built. I had no way of knowing that salvation would come from the most unexpected source, or that the phone call that would change everything was already racing toward me through the electronic networks that connected every corner of the modern world. The phone started ringing at 0630 hours on Tuesday morning, jarring me from the first decent sleep I'd managed since returning to base. The caller ID showed Victoria's number, and I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But years of military conditioning had trained me to respond to emergencies, and my sister never called this early unless something was wrong. "Alex?" Victoria's voice was strained, carrying an edge of panic I hadn't heard since we were children. "Thank God you answered. We have a situation." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What kind of situation?" "It's Mother. She collapsed yesterday evening at the country club. They rushed her to Westchester General." Victoria's words came in rapid bursts, the way people spoke when trying to maintain control over chaos. "The doctors are running tests, but they think it might be her heart." My chest tightened with a familiar mixture of duty and dread. "How serious is it?" "We don't know yet. She's stable, but they want to keep her for observation." "Alex, I know things were tense at dinner on Sunday, but we need you here. You're her daughter, regardless of everything else. Regardless of everything else." Even in crisis, Victoria couldn't resist the subtle dig, the reminder that my place in the family was conditional, dependent on their needs rather than my worth. "I'll catch the first flight I can get," I heard myself saying, though part of me wondered why I was so quick to respond to people who'd spent years making it clear I didn't belong. "Good. And Alex?" Victoria's voice softened slightly. "Maybe this could be a chance for all of us to reset, to remember what's really important." The flight to New York gave me 3 hours to think about Victoria's words, to examine the complex knot of obligation and resentment that tied me to my family. The woman sitting next to me was reading a romance novel, occasionally glancing at my uniform with the mixture of respect and curiosity that civilians often showed. She had no idea that the colonel beside her was racing toward a family that saw her service as an embarrassment. By the time I reached Westchester General, the afternoon sun was slanting through the hospital's tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The smell of antiseptic and floor wax brought back memories of visiting my father during his final illness. The way hospitals had made everyone feel small and helpless. I found my family in the cardiac wing's waiting area, a space designed to provide comfort but somehow managing to feel sterile and unwelcoming. Marcus was pacing near the windows, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours of stress. Victoria sat in one of the beige chairs, her perfect makeup showing signs of strain around her eyes. They both looked up as I approached, and for a moment I saw something that might have been relief cross their faces. Any updates? I asked, settling into the chair across from Victoria. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face me. The cardiologist wants to do more tests tomorrow. Possible bypass surgery, depending on what they find. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was worried about exams or girlfriends. She's asking for you. That surprised me. After Sunday's dinner, I'd assumed Mother would prefer to keep me at arm's length, even in crisis. She's in room 412, Victoria said, standing and smoothing her skirt. But Alex, before you go up there, she paused, exchanging a look with Marcus that I couldn't quite decipher. She's been saying some things. The medication, the stress, it's making her a bit confused. Don't take anything she says too seriously. The warning felt odd, but I nodded and headed for the elevator. The cardiac floor was quieter than the main lobby, filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the hushed conversations of worried families. Room 412 was at the end of the hall, and through the partially open door, I could see my mother lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Mother? I knocked gently on the doorframe before entering. Eleanor Mitchell opened her eyes, and for a moment they were clearer and more focused than they'd been in years. Alexandra, you came. Of course I came. I moved to the bedside chair, noting the various monitors and IV lines that connected her to the machinery keeping track of her vital signs. How are you feeling? Like an old fool, she said with a weak smile. 73 years old and I thought I was invincible. She studied my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. You look tired, sweetheart. Are you taking care of yourself? Sweetheart. She hadn't called me that in over a decade. I'm fine, Mother. Don't worry about me. She reached out with a trembling hand and grasped my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone who'd just had a cardiac episode. I need to tell you something, Alexandra, something I should have said years ago. Before she could continue, the door opened and Marcus stepped in, his face wearing an expression of forced cheer. How are my two favorite ladies? He said with aggressive brightness. Mom, you look much better. The color's coming back to your cheeks. Mother's grip on my wrist tightened slightly, and I saw something flicker across her face. Frustration, maybe, or annoyance at the interruption. Marcus, dear, could you give Alexandra and me a few minutes alone? Actually, the nurse said not to tire you out with too many visitors, Marcus replied smoothly, moving to the other side of the bed. Victoria's waiting downstairs. She wanted to come up too, but we thought it might be overwhelming. I felt the moment slipping away, whatever Mother had wanted to tell me dissolving under Marcus's cheerful intrusion. She released my wrist and settled back against her pillows, the clarity in her eyes dimming as exhaustion took hold. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. Each time I tried to have a private conversation with Mother, one of my siblings would appear with some urgent concern or helpful suggestion. Victoria brought flowers that needed arranging. Marcus arrived with updates from the doctors that required detailed explanation. They seemed to be tag-teaming, ensuring that Mother and I were never alone for more than a few minutes. It was subtle, professional even, the way they managed to control the narrative and the access. If I hadn't been trained in counterintelligence, I might not have noticed the coordination. But there was something deliberate about their timing, something calculated about the way they steered conversations away from certain topics. The manipulation escalated on Thursday evening. I'd been staying at a hotel near the hospital, spending my days in the waiting room and my evenings reviewing intelligence reports on my laptop. Victoria found me in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a sandwich that tasted like cardboard. "We need to talk," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Her expression was serious, sisterly concern, mixed with something harder to identify. About Mother's condition? About what happens next? Victoria folded her hands on the table, her wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. "The doctors think she'll need at least 6 months of recovery time, maybe longer. She can't live alone anymore, Alex. Someone needs to take care of her." I waited, sensing where this conversation was heading. "Marcus and I have been discussing it," Victoria continued. "We think the best solution would be for Mother to move in with one of us. Marcus has the bigger house, but Jennifer's pregnant again, and with their careers." She shrugged as if the decision were obvious. "We think she should come stay with me and David." "That sounds reasonable," I said carefully. "The thing is, it's going to be expensive. Home health aides, modifications to the house, medical equipment. Medicare will cover some of it, but—" Victoria's voice took on a tone of reluctant practicality. "We're going to need to liquidate some of Mother's assets." Now we were getting to the real point. "She owns that house outright," Victoria continued. "It's worth at least $2 million in today's market. If we sell it, we can use the proceeds to ensure she gets the best possible care." I set down my sandwich, my appetite completely gone. "Have you discussed this with Mother?" "She's not really in a position to make major financial decisions right now," Victoria said smoothly. "The doctor said the medication can affect cognitive function. We need to think about what's best for her long-term care." The logic was sound. The concerns seemed genuine, but something about Victoria's presentation felt rehearsed. She was hitting all the right emotional notes: family responsibility, Mother's well-being, practical necessity, while glossing over the fact that selling the house would net her and Marcus a substantial inheritance. "Where would Mother live if you sell the house?" I asked. "With me, like I said. We'll convert the guest suite into a proper apartment for her. She'll have her independence but also the support she needs." Victoria leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Alex, I know you care about Mother, but you have to be realistic. You're never here. Your career keeps you traveling all over the world. You can't provide the day-to-day care she's going to need." The accusation was wrapped in logic, but it cut deep. Once again, my service was being used as evidence of my inadequacy, my absence proof that I didn't really care. "I could take leave," I said, "extended leave, if necessary." Victoria's laugh was gentle, but dismissive. "And do what? You don't know anything about elder care, Alex. You've spent your entire adult life in the military. Taking care of a recovering cardiac patient isn't like commanding soldiers." There it was again. The suggestion that my skills, my experience, my entire professional life was irrelevant to real-world problems. That 23 years of leadership, crisis management, and complex problem-solving somehow didn't translate to civilian situations. "Besides," Victoria continued, "wouldn't taking extended leave hurt your career? You've worked so hard to get where you are. It would be a shame to throw that away now." The concern sounded genuine, but there was something underneath it, a subtle satisfaction at the bind she was putting me in. If I stayed to care for Mother, I was abandoning my military career. If I returned to my duties, I was abandoning my family responsibilities. Either way, I would be proving their point about my priorities. "I just want what's best for Mother," I said finally. "We all do," Victoria agreed. "That's why Marcus and I think it's best if you sign the power of attorney documents. Just temporarily, while she's recovering. That way we can handle the sale of the house and get her settled without having to bother her with all the legal details." Power of attorney. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. They wanted legal control over Mother's finances, her property, her future. And they wanted me to sign away any say in the matter. "I'd like to talk to Mother about this first," I said. Victoria's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. But remember what the doctor said about not stressing her out. This is exactly the kind of decision-making pressure they warned us to avoid. I was being boxed in, maneuvered into a position where questioning their plan would make me the villain, the ungrateful daughter putting her own interests ahead of her mother's health. It was expertly done, so smooth and reasonable that I almost admired the craftsmanship. Almost. That night, alone in my hotel room, I stared at the legal documents Victoria had given me. Power of attorney forms, property transfer papers, all professionally prepared and ready for my signature. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the effect was clear. I would be signing away any claim to Mother's estate, any voice in her care decisions. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Talk to the cardiologist. He thinks Mom's ready to be discharged this weekend. We need to move quickly on the house sale to get everything set up for her recovery. The pressure was mounting, the timeline accelerating. They wanted this resolved before Mother was clear-headed enough to fully understand what was happening, before I had time to think too deeply about the implications. I closed the documents and set them aside. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, manipulated, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what was bothering me. Maybe it was just my natural suspicion, the intelligence officer's instinct to look for hidden motives and ulterior agendas. Or maybe it was something more. The breaking point came at 03:47 hours on Friday morning. I'd been lying awake in my hotel room, staring at the ceiling and replaying the week's events when my secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The sender was Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez, my deputy commander at Fort Braxton, and the timestamp showed it had been sent just minutes earlier. Ma'am, urgent situation developing. Chinese cyber unit attempting breach of classified servers. Need your authorization for defensive protocols. How soon can you return? I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with operational emergencies. This was real. This mattered. Lives and national security hung in the balance, and my people needed me. Not because I was someone's daughter or sister, but because I was Colonel Alexandra Thompson, and I had specific skills and knowledge that no one else possessed. I was reaching for my laptop to initiate secure communications when another text arrived. This one from Victoria. Mom asking for you. Says she needs to tell you something important before discharge. Can you be here by 8 a.m.? Doctors want to move quickly. The juxtaposition was stark and suddenly illuminating. On one hand, I had soldiers under my command facing a genuine crisis that required my expertise. On the other, I had family members who seemed determined to keep me from having an honest conversation with my mother, manufacturing urgency around decisions that would benefit them financially. For the first time since arriving in New York, I saw the situation with the clarity that had made me successful in intelligence work. The patterns were there, hidden in plain sight. The coordinated interruptions, the legal documents prepared in advance, the accelerated timeline, the constant messaging about Mother's cognitive impairment, it all had the hallmarks of a carefully orchestrated operation. I opened my laptop and initiated a secure video conference with Rodriguez. His face appeared on the screen, tension evident in his posture. Behind him, I could see the familiar chaos of our operations center. Analysts hunched over monitors, the controlled urgency of professionals dealing with a genuine crisis. Give me a status report, I said, slipping into command mode. Chinese unit designated as APT-41 attempting to penetrate our logistics databases. They're using zero-day exploits we haven't seen before. Captain Morrison implemented the first-tier countermeasures, but we need your authorization for the advanced protocols. I walked him through the authorization procedures, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I accessed classified systems and deployed defensive measures. This was who I was. Not the disappointing daughter who couldn't be trusted with family decisions, but a senior military officer responsible for protecting American interests against sophisticated threats. Excellent work, Rodriguez. Maintain defensive posture and keep me informed of any developments. I'll be returning to base this afternoon. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, everything okay? You seem distracted this week. The question caught me off guard. Rodriguez was one of my most trusted officers, someone whose judgment I respected completely. If he'd noticed my distraction, it meant I'd been allowing family drama to affect my professional performance. Personal matters, I said simply. But they're resolved now. After ending the call, I sat in the pre-dawn darkness of my hotel room and felt something fundamental shift inside me. For days, I'd been allowing my family to make me question my worth, my choices, my entire life's work. I'd been playing defense, reacting to their moves instead of thinking strategically. Presses. But I was an intelligence officer. Analysis was what I did. And when I applied those same analytical skills to my family's behavior, the picture that emerged was deeply troubling. I opened a new document on my laptop and began to construct what intelligence analysts called a link analysis, mapping relationships, timelines, and motivations to understand the true nature of the threat I was facing. The facts were straightforward. Mother had suffered a cardiac episode, but according to her medical records, which I'd requested as next of kin, it was relatively minor. A single blockage, easily treatable with a stent, not the life-threatening emergency my siblings had portrayed. She was scheduled for discharge that morning, not because she was too impaired to make decisions, but because she was recovering well and eager to go home. The house they wanted to sell was worth significantly more than the $2 million Victoria had mentioned. Recent comparable sales in the neighborhood suggested a value closer to $3 million, possibly more. Even accounting for Mother's care expenses, the sale would generate a substantial windfall for my siblings. Most tellingly, the power of attorney documents Victoria had given me were dated 3 weeks before Mother's cardiac episode. They'd been prepared well in advance, waiting for the right crisis to justify their use. I'd been so focused on the family dynamics, so wounded by their dismissal of my career, that I'd missed the obvious signs of a well-planned financial scheme. They weren't just embarrassed by my military service. They were actively working to exclude me from any inheritance, while positioning themselves as the responsible, caring children. My phone rang, interrupting my analysis. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar. "Colonel Thompson? This is Dr. Patricia Hernandez, your mother's cardiologist. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, doctor. Is there a problem with my mother's condition?" "Quite the opposite. Your mother is doing remarkably well. The procedure was successful, and her cognitive function is completely normal. In fact, she's been asking specifically to speak with you alone before her discharge." Dr. Hernandez paused. "I wanted to call you directly because she seemed concerned that your siblings might interfere with that conversation." The puzzle pieces clicked into place. Mother wasn't cognitively impaired. She wasn't too weak to make decisions. She wanted to talk to me, and my siblings were preventing it because they knew she might say something that would complicate their plans. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, is my mother competent to make her own financial and legal decisions?" "Absolutely. Colonel Thompson, I hope I'm not overstepping, but your mother mentioned that there's some family disagreement about her care going forward. She asked me to tell you that she's perfectly capable of managing her own affairs and making her own choices about where she wants to live." After ending the call with Dr. Hernandez, I felt the familiar sensation of pieces falling into place, the moment when a complex intelligence puzzle suddenly revealed its underlying structure. My family hadn't just been dismissive of my career, they'd been actively manipulating a crisis to achieve financial gain while counting on my emotional vulnerability to prevent me from seeing clearly. But they'd made a critical error. They'd underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Captain Sarah Chen answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. "Colonel Thompson, is everything all right?" Sarah was more than just another officer under my command. She was a brilliant analyst with a law degree from Stanford, someone who'd left a lucrative career in corporate law to serve her country. More importantly, she was someone I trusted completely. "Sarah, I need a favor, a personal one, but it involves potential criminal activity." "What do you need?" I outlined the situation in crisp, professional terms. The medical crisis, the power of attorney documents, the property sale timeline, the coordination to prevent private conversations. Sarah listened without interruption, and I could practically hear her legal mind processing the information. "Colonel, that sounds like potential elder abuse and financial exploitation. Have you documented any of this?" "I'm building a case file now, but I need someone with legal expertise to review the documents they want me to sign. Send them to my secure email. I'll have an analysis ready within 2 hours." Sarah paused. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, this sounds like exactly the kind of thing you'd catch if it were happening to someone else's family." She was right. I'd been so emotionally invested in wanting my family's approval that I'd ignored my own professional instincts. But that emotional fog was lifting, replaced by the cold clarity that had made me successful in intelligence work. My next call was to Master Sergeant Robert Washington, my senior non-commissioned officer and someone who'd served with me for over 8 years. If Sarah was my analytical brain, Sergeant Washington was my operational muscle, a man who could make things happen through the vast network of military and veteran connections he'd built over 23 years of service. Colonel, you sound different. More like yourself. I need your help with a family situation, Sergeant. It involves potential fraud and elder abuse. What do you need? Washington listened as I explained the situation, his occasional questions sharp and focused. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Ma'am, permission to speak freely? Always. I've seen this before. Family members who think military folks are suckers because we're trained to follow orders and respect authority. They count on us being too noble to fight dirty. His voice hardened. But they forget that we're also trained to neutralize threats and protect what matters. What are you suggesting? Private investigator named Danny Kowalski, former Army CID, knows how to handle sensitive situations. He owes me a favor from when I helped clear his nephew on a trumped-up charge. Give me 2 hours, and I'll have him digging into your siblings' financial situations. The plan was taking shape, driven by the same methodical approach I used for military operations. Intelligence gathering, legal analysis, operational support. The same principles that had served me well in Afghanistan and Iraq would serve me equally well in Westchester County. My final call was to Colonel Michael Patterson, my former commanding officer and current Pentagon liaison. Mike had become something of a mentor over the years, someone whose judgment I trusted implicitly. Alex? Good to hear from you. How's the family situation? I'd briefed him earlier in the week about taking emergency leave, though I'd kept the details vague. Now I laid out the full picture, including my growing suspicions about my siblings' motives. Son of a bitch, Mike said when I finished. Alex, you know I think of you as family, right? More than family. You're one of the finest officers I've ever worked with. If someone's trying to scam you, they're going to have to go through all of us. I don't want to drag the military into personal matters. This isn't about the military. This is about protecting someone I care about. Mike's voice carried the authority of someone who'd commanded brigades in combat. You need anything. Legal resources, character witnesses, whatever. You call me. And Alex? Stop being so damn noble about this. These people are playing for keeps. It's time you did the same. By 0800 hours, I had assembled what any intelligence officer would recognize as a formidable operational team. Sarah would handle legal analysis, Washington would coordinate investigation, Kowalski would gather financial intelligence, and Colonel Patterson would provide strategic oversight and resources. For the first time since arriving in New York, I felt like myself again. Not the desperate daughter seeking family approval, but Colonel Alexandra Thompson, military intelligence officer, someone who specialized in identifying threats and neutralizing them. My siblings had made a crucial mistake. They'd assumed that my years of military service had made me naive about civilian corruption, that my sense of duty and family loyalty would blind me to their manipulations. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Hiwisa. I checked my watch. Victoria expected me at the hospital by 0800. Perfect. It was time to go on the offensive. Hiwisa. I arrived at Westchester General at precisely 0800 hours, but instead of heading directly to Mother's room, I made a detour to the hospital's business office. The administrative staff was just beginning their day, and I found myself speaking with Mrs. Patricia Vance, the patient financial services coordinator who'd been handling Mother's account. Colonel Thompson, how can I help you this morning? Mrs. Vance was professional but warm, the kind of person who dealt with worried families every day. I'm trying to understand the billing and insurance situation for my mother, Eleanor Mitchell. There seems to be some confusion about her financial obligations. Mrs. Vance pulled up Mother's file on her computer, her eyebrows rising slightly as she reviewed the information. Actually, Colonel, your mother's account shows no outstanding balance. Her insurance covered the procedure completely, and she has excellent supplemental coverage. There are no significant medical expenses that would require. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Well, there's nothing that would require liquidating assets for payment. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Victoria and Marcus had been using Mother's medical expenses as justification for selling the house, but those expenses were largely imaginary. The insurance coverage was comprehensive and the ongoing care requirements were minimal. Mrs. Vance, has anyone else inquired about my mother's financial obligations? Family members, perhaps? Well, your sister Victoria did call yesterday asking about payment plans and discussing some rather expensive care options that frankly seemed unnecessary for your mother's condition. Mrs. Vance lowered her voice slightly. Between you and me, Colonel, I got the impression she was fishing for information that would support a particular narrative about your mother's financial needs. I thanked Mrs. Vance and headed for the elevator, my secure phone buzzing with an encrypted message from Captain Chen. Her legal analysis was complete, and the results were damning. Colonel, her message read, the power of attorney documents are legally valid but extremely broad in scope. They would grant complete financial control, including the ability to sell property, access bank accounts, and make investment decisions without any oversight or accountability. More concerning, the language includes provisions that would be difficult to revoke once signed. This is not standard eldercare documentation. This is designed for permanent wealth transfer. The elevator doors opened on the cardiac floor, and I spotted Victoria immediately. She was standing near the nurse's station, engaged in animated conversation with a man I didn't recognize. He was middle-aged, expensively dressed, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed legal profession. As I approached, I caught fragments of their conversation. Market conditions are favorable. Need to move quickly before... tax implications if we delay. Victoria noticed me and immediately shifted into her concerned sister persona. Alex, perfect timing. This is Richard Blackwood, Mother's estate attorney. We were just discussing the logistics of the property transfer. Blackwood extended his hand with the practiced charm of someone accustomed to managing wealthy clients. Colonel Thompson, pleasure to meet you. Your sister has been explaining the urgency of your mother's situation. Has he met with our mother? I asked Victoria directly. A flicker of irritation crossed her face before she smoothed it away. Mother's been sedated for pain management. Richard flew up from the city specifically to help us navigate this complex situation. We don't want to burden her with legal details when she should be focusing on recovery. Sedated. That was news to me, considering Dr. Hernandez had called her cognitive function completely normal just hours earlier. I'd like to speak with Mother's medical team before discussing any legal matters, I said firmly. Blackwood consulted his expensive watch. I'm afraid I have another appointment this afternoon. Perhaps we could expedite the documentation review? Your siblings have been quite thorough in their preparation. I'll need time to review everything with my own legal counsel, I replied, watching both Victoria and Blackwood's expressions tighten almost imperceptibly. Alex, we discussed this, Victoria said, her voice taking on a strained quality. Time is a factor here. The real estate market, Mother's medical needs. Then we'll have to work within my timeline, I said, turning toward Mother's room. I'll be back in touch. I found Mother sitting up in bed, looking alert and frustrated. The moment she saw me, her face brightened with relief. Alexandra, thank God. They've been keeping me drugged up like some kind of invalid. Her voice was clear and strong. Nothing like the confused, weakened woman my siblings had described. Every time I asked to speak with you alone, suddenly it's time for more medication or another test. I pulled the visitor chair close to her bed and sat down. Mother, I need you to tell me exactly what's been happening, from the beginning. Eleanor Mitchell's story unfolded like a textbook case of elder manipulation. The cardiac episode had been real but minor, easily treated with outpatient procedures. Victoria and Marcus had immediately swooped in, taking control of her medical decisions and restricting her communication with the outside world. They brought that attorney yesterday, Mother said, her voice growing angry. Tried to get me to sign papers while I was groggy from medication. When I refused and asked for you, they said you were too busy with your military duties to be bothered with family matters. What exactly did they want you to sign? Power of attorney documents, something about the house. Richard, that's the attorney. He kept talking about tax advantages and medical expenses, making it sound like I was going to be a financial burden on the family. Mother's eyes flashed with indignation. 47 years I've been managing my own affairs quite successfully, thank you very much. My secure phone vibrated with a message from Sergeant Washington. Danny Kowalski had completed his preliminary financial investigation, and the results were illuminating. I excused myself to step into the hallway and read the full report. Marcus's advertising firm was hemorrhaging money, having lost 3 major clients in the past 6 months. His personal finances were equally dire. Over-leveraged on his house, maxed out credit cards, a gambling habit that had cost him nearly $200,000 in the past year. Victoria's situation was different but equally desperate. Her husband David's surgical practice was facing multiple malpractice suits, and their lifestyle of private schools and country club memberships was straining their resources. Both of my siblings were facing financial ruin, and Mother's house represented a $3 million solution to their problems. But the most damning information came from Kowalski's investigation into the estate attorney, Richard Blackwood. He specialized in what the industry euphemistically called rapid estate liquidation, helping families quickly convert elderly relatives' assets into cash. He'd been involved in several cases that had attracted attention from state elder abuse investigators. Hellas. I was reviewing this information when my phone rang. Captain Chen's voice was tense with excitement. Colonel, I found something big. I cross-referenced the power of attorney documents with public records, and this isn't the first time Blackwood has prepared identical paperwork for your siblings. 3 months ago, he filed similar documents for a different elderly client, documents that Victoria co-signed as a witness. Co-signed how? She's listed as a notary public, which allows her to authenticate legal documents. But here's the problem. I checked with the state licensing board. Victoria's notary commission expired 2 years ago. Any documents she's notarized since then are invalid, potentially fraudulent. The net was tightening. My siblings weren't just opportunistic. They were part of a systematic scheme to defraud elderly people of their assets. Victoria had been using an expired notary seal to authenticate fraudulent documents, while Marcus provided the desperate financial motivation. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from Colonel Patterson at the Pentagon. Alex, got some interesting intelligence through unofficial channels. FBI Financial Crimes Unit has an ongoing investigation into elder abuse schemes in the Northeast. Might be worth a conversation. I stepped back into Mother's room, where she was staring out the window at the hospital parking lot. She turned when she heard me enter, her expression hopeful. Alexandra, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Do you want my house? Is that what this is about? The question caught me off guard. Mother, because if you do, it's yours. I've been thinking about updating my will anyway. You're the one who served our country with honor, who built something meaningful with your life. Victoria and Marcus. She shook her head sadly. They've always seen me as a bank account with legs. This isn't about inheritance, Mother. This is about protecting you from people who want to take advantage of your medical situation. Eleanor studied my face for a long moment. You know what they're doing, don't you? You've figured it out. I'm beginning to understand the scope of it, yes. Good. Her voice hardened with determination. Because I want them stopped. Not just prevented. Stopped completely. What they've put me through this week, the lies they've told you about me being incompetent. She gripped my hand firmly. I want them held accountable. My secure phone rang and I saw Kowalski's number on the display. I stepped back into the hallway to take the call. Colonel Thompson? Danny Kowalski. I've got some information you need to hear immediately. Go ahead. Your brother Marcus has been embezzling from his advertising firm. Small amounts at first, but it escalated. The company's forensic accountant is scheduled to present findings to the board next Monday. Marcus is looking at criminal charges and civil liability in the millions. How does that connect to my mother's situation? The timeline. Your mother's cardiac episode happened 3 days after Marcus learned about the forensic audit. This isn't just opportunistic elder abuse. It's a desperate attempt to generate cash before his world collapses. The pieces were forming a complete picture now. Marcus faced imminent financial and legal catastrophe. Victoria was complicit in document fraud through her expired notary seal. Together, they identified Mother's house as their salvation and orchestrated a scheme to gain control of it through manipulated medical crisis and fraudulent legal documentation. But they'd made a critical error in calculation. They'd assumed I was the same person who'd sat quietly through Sunday dinner, accepting their dismissal and criticism. They didn't understand that Colonel Alexandra Thompson was someone who specialized in identifying, analyzing, and neutralizing threats. As I prepared to return to Mother's room, my phone buzzed with one final message that would change everything. It was from Dr. Hernandez, and it was marked urgent. Colonel Thompson, there's something about your mother's medical records you need to know immediately. Can you meet me in my office in 20 minutes? This is extremely sensitive and involves potential criminal activity. I looked through the window into Mother's room, where she sat waiting for me with the determined expression of someone ready to fight back. Then I thought about Victoria and Marcus, probably congratulating themselves on their careful planning and successful manipulation. They had no idea what was coming for them. The investigation phase was complete. It was time to move to the final confrontation. Dr. Hernandez's office was spartanly decorated, medical diplomas and certificates lining the walls like battle ribbons. She gestured for me to sit across from her desk, her expression grave as she pulled up Mother's electronic medical file on her computer screen. Colonel Thompson, what I'm about to show you constitutes medical fraud and potentially criminal conspiracy. She turned the monitor so I could see the records clearly. Your mother's cardiac episode was real, but someone has been systematically altering her medical records to make her condition appear far more severe than it actually is. The screen showed a timeline of entries that had been modified after the fact. Normal post-procedure notes had been changed to indicate cognitive impairment, confusion, and severe weakness. Test results showing complete recovery had been altered to suggest ongoing cardiac instability requiring extensive care. Who has access to make these changes? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. The modifications were made using Victoria Caldwell's hospital volunteer credentials. She's been a member of our auxiliary board for 5 years, which gives her limited access to patient records for fundraising and administrative purposes. Dr. Hernandez's voice was tight, with professional outrage. She's been systematically falsifying your mother's condition to support whatever legal case they're building. Can you trace exactly what was changed and when? Every electronic medical record maintains an audit trail. I've already compiled a complete report showing the original entries versus the modifications. She handed me a thick folder. Colonel, this goes far beyond family disputes. This is healthcare fraud, which is a federal crime. My secure phone buzzed with an urgent message from Captain Chen. FBI Financial Crimes Unit wants to meet. Agent Lisa Park can be at your location in 2 hours. She's been tracking similar schemes. I thanked Dr. Hernandez and returned to Mother's room, where I found Victoria and Marcus engaged in heated, whispered conversation near the window. They stopped abruptly when they saw me, both attempting to arrange their faces into expressions of concerned family solidarity. Alex, we were just discussing the discharge paperwork, Victoria said with forced brightness. Richard thinks we should finalize everything today before Mother gets overwhelmed by too many decisions. Where is Richard now? I asked. In the family conference room with the social worker, arranging for home care services, Marcus replied. His face was flushed, and I noticed sweat beading on his forehead despite the hospital's air conditioning. Good. Then this is perfect timing. I pulled out my phone and activated the recording function, something that was legal in New York as long as one party consented. I have some questions about the power of attorney documents you want Mother to sign. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of questions? Questions about why you used an expired notary seal to authenticate them. Questions about why Richard Blackwood is currently under investigation by the State Attorney General's office for elder abuse schemes. Questions about why Marcus needs $3 million before Monday when his embezzlement charges are filed. The effect was immediate and devastating. Marcus went white as paper, his hand instinctively moving to steady himself against the wall. Victoria's carefully composed expression cracked, revealing a flash of pure fury before she regained control. I don't know what you think you've discovered, Victoria said, her voice ice cold, but you're making serious accusations without any proof. I opened the folder Dr. Hernandez had given me and spread the medical record comparisons across Mother's bedside table. Actually, I have quite a bit of proof, including evidence that you've been systematically altering Mother's medical records to make her appear incompetent. Marcus found his voice, though it was shaky and desperate. Alex, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. The firm, the investigation. I need help. We're family. We're supposed to help each other. Help each other by committing fraud? By stealing from our mother while she's recovering from surgery? It's not stealing, Victoria snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. That house is going to be ours eventually anyway. We're just expediting the process for everyone's benefit. Everyone's benefit? Or just yours? The conference room door opened, and Richard Blackwood entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to intimidating grieving families into quick decisions. His expression shifted when he saw the medical records spread across the table and noticed the tension in the room. Is there a problem here? He asked smoothly. Several problems, I replied, starting with the fact that you're operating an elder abuse scheme and ending with the fact that the FBI is already investigating your previous cases. Blackwood's professional composure faltered for just a moment before returning. Colonel Thompson, I think you're allowing family emotions to cloud your judgment. These are standard estate planning procedures designed to protect your mother's interests. Standard procedures don't require fraudulent medical records and expired notary seals. At that moment, the door opened again and a woman in a navy blue suit entered, followed by a man in similar professional attire. The woman held up a leather credential case. Agent Lisa Park, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. Richard Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse and healthcare fraud. The arrest unfolded with the efficiency of a well-coordinated military operation. Agent Park read Blackwood his rights while her partner, Agent Martinez, secured the fraudulent documents. Victoria and Marcus stood frozen, watching their carefully constructed scheme collapse in real time. Victoria Caldwell and Marcus Mitchell, Agent Park continued, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, healthcare fraud, and elder abuse. Mrs. Caldwell, you're also charged with notary fraud and falsifying medical records. The next few hours passed in a blur of statements, evidence collection, and formal procedures. Mother, far from being the confused invalid my siblings had portrayed, gave a clear and damning statement about the manipulation and coercion she'd experienced. Her cognitive assessment, administered by an independent neuropsychologist, showed perfect mental acuity. As the FBI agents led my siblings away in handcuffs, Victoria turned back toward me, her face twisted with rage. You sanctimonious bitch, she hissed. You've destroyed our family over money, over a house you don't even want. I destroyed a criminal conspiracy, I replied calmly. The family was destroyed years ago when you decided I wasn't worth your respect. Marcus said nothing, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As they disappeared down the hospital corridor, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Only a profound sadness for what we might have been if they'd chosen different paths. Agent Park approached me as the chaos settled. Colonel Thompson, I wanted to thank you personally. Your investigation and documentation made our job significantly easier. We've been tracking Blackwood's operation for 18 months, but we never had victims willing to cooperate fully. What happens now? Federal charges will be filed within 48 hours. Given the evidence and the pattern of previous offenses, they're looking at significant prison time. Your brother's embezzlement charges will be filed separately by the state, but they'll likely run concurrent with federal sentences. 3 weeks later, I sat in my office at Fort Braxton, reviewing intelligence reports when Captain Chen knocked on my door. She entered carrying a newspaper and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. Ma'am, thought you should see this. She handed me the Westchester County Journal, folded to an article with the headline, Local Real Estate Broker, Brother Sentenced in Elder Abuse Scheme. Victoria had received 8 years in federal prison. Marcus got 10 years due to the additional embezzlement charges. Blackwood, as the ringleader with multiple prior offenses, received 15 years. The article mentioned that several other elderly victims had come forward after the arrests, expanding the scope of their crimes considerably. How do you feel about it, ma'am? Chen asked carefully. I set down the newspaper and looked out my office window at the training fields where soldiers were conducting exercises. I feel like justice was served. Not just for my mother, but for all their victims. And your family? My real family is here, I said, gesturing toward the base around us. People who value service, integrity, and truth. People who understand that some things are worth fighting for. Mother had indeed updated her will, leaving the house and the majority of her estate to me. But more importantly, she'd moved to a senior community near Fort Braxton, where we had dinner every Sunday, conversations filled with respect, admiration, and genuine affection. The irony wasn't lost on me. My siblings had spent years telling me that my military service was meaningless, that I was playing soldier while they built real lives. In the end, it was those very military skills, intelligence analysis, strategic thinking, network building, and operational execution, that had protected Mother and brought criminals to justice. As I returned to my intelligence reports, my secure phone buzzed with a message from General Morrison about my upcoming promotion to Brigadier General. The recommendation had come through the Pentagon, endorsed by officers who valued my work and recognized my potential. Colonel Thompson would soon become General Thompson, not because I'd finally learned to be normal, but because I'd never stopped being exactly who I was meant to be. My family had called me nothing at that Sunday dinner, but I was something they could never understand or diminish. I was a soldier, a protector, a woman who had found her true worth in service to something larger than herself. And that, I realized, was everything. 1 year later, I stood before the mirror in my quarters at Fort Braxton, adjusting the single star on my collar, Brigadier General Alexandra Thompson. The reflection looking back at me was the same woman who'd sat through that devastating family dinner, but everything else had changed. The promotion ceremony had been attended by colleagues, fellow officers, and soldiers I'd commanded over the years. Mother sat in the front row, beaming with pride as General Morrison pinned the star to my uniform. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and valued by the people who mattered most. The investigation had expanded far beyond my family's crimes. Agent Park's task force had uncovered a network of elder abuse schemes across 3 states, resulting in 47 arrests and the recovery of over $12 million in stolen assets. My testimony had become the cornerstone case that prosecutors used to establish federal precedents for healthcare fraud and elder abuse situations. But the real transformation wasn't in the courtrooms or promotion ceremonies. It was in the quiet moments, like my weekly dinners with Mother at her new senior community. She'd become a fierce advocate for elder rights, speaking at conferences, and working with legislators to strengthen protections for vulnerable seniors. "You know what I'm proudest of?" she'd said during our last dinner together. "Not that you became a general, though that's wonderful. I'm proud that you never let them convince you that service was somehow less valuable than their shallow pursuits." The question that had haunted me after that family dinner, whether I'd wasted my life on something meaningless, now seemed absurd. My military skills hadn't just served our nation, they'd protected innocent people from predators who wore the masks of loving family members. I'd established the Eleanor Mitchell Foundation for Elder Protection, using the proceeds from Mother's eventual estate to fund investigations into suspected abuse cases. The foundation employed former military intelligence officers and FBI agents, people who understood that protecting the vulnerable was a mission worth dedicating your life to. 3 months ago, I'd received a letter from a young woman named Rebecca Chen, Captain Chen's niece, who'd been inspired by our story to enter military service. She was headed to West Point in the fall, with dreams of following in my footsteps in military intelligence. "General Thompson," she'd written, "your story taught me that strength isn't about fitting into other people's expectations. It's about becoming who you're meant to be, and using those gifts to protect others." That letter sat framed on my desk, a reminder that legacy isn't about blood relations or inherited wealth. It's about the lives you touch, and the principles you pass forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Park. "Another family came forward after seeing your foundation's work. 3 elderly victims, estimated $2 million in stolen assets. Can you consult on the case?" I smiled as I typed back, "Absolutely. Send me the files." This was my life now, using everything I'd learned in military service to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Fighting battles that mattered against enemies who hid behind family bonds and legal documents. As I prepared to leave for another day of meaningful work, I thought about Victoria and Marcus, serving their sentences in federal prison. They'd believed that success was measured in material possessions and social status, that my decades of service were somehow less real than their business dealings. They'd been so wrong, it was almost tragic. Success wasn't about the size of your house or the prestige of your social circle. It was about integrity under pressure, courage in the face of opposition, and the willingness to stand up for what's right even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. My name is Brigadier General Alexandra Thompson, and this is my story. It took 39 years and a family betrayal to understand that your true value is never determined by people who are too small to see your worth. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are, because it forces you to remember exactly who you are. Service isn't a stepping stone to real life. Service is real life. And there is no higher calling than protecting those who cannot protect themselves, whether they're soldiers under your command or elderly parents being exploited by their own children. The family that calls you nothing is not your family. Your family consists of the people who see your worth, celebrate your victories, and stand with you when the fight gets difficult. Find them, value them, protect them, because in the end, that's what really matters. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.